The first ball of the season at Harwell House was lit by 300 candles, and not one of them was meant for Eleanor Whitlow. She stood at the edge of the long gallery in a gown of pale green silk that did not belong to her, and felt the fabric breathe against her ribs as though it remembered another body. The room glittered the way a frozen river glitters, beautiful and indifferent and cold underneath. She had counted the candles to keep her hands from shaking. 300! And the count had not helped. The gown had been her sister's. Cecilia had worn it once to a supper in town the spring before the fever took her, and she had laughed in it, and a man had bent his head to listen to that laugh as though it were the only sound in England. Eleanor had let out the seams at the bodice by half an inch, and taken in nothing else because she did not want to alter what her sister had been. So she wore Cecilia into the Duke of Harwell's ballroom. The dead carried in on the living, and no one in the bright and watchful room knew it. A woman in garnet silk leaned toward her companion behind a painted fan. The whisper was not quite a whisper. To the season, Eleanor knew. She was nobody worth the trouble of lowering a voice for. "That is the other Whitlow girl," the woman said. "The plain one. They send her, now that the pretty one is in the ground." The words landed somewhere under Eleanor's breastbone and stayed there. She did not turn her head. She had learned long ago that the trick of surviving a room like this was to become very still, the way a hare goes still in open grass, trusting that motion is what the hawk sees. Her aunt had told her to come. Her aunt had said that the family could not afford to refuse the Duke's invitation, whatever the Duke had once been to Cecilia, and Eleanor had not argued, because arguing cost more than obedience, and she had very little left to spend. What the room did not know, what the woman in garnet could not have guessed behind her fan, was that the gown had a secret stitched into its hem. A single forget-me-not, pressed flat and dry, sewn between the lining and the silk where Cecilia had hidden it the night before the supper in town. Eleanor had found it when she let out the seams. She had not removed it. It rode against her ankle now, light as a held breath, and it was the only thing in the room that knew her sister's name. Stay with me through this one. There is a moment near the end I would not have you miss. And it begins, as these things do, with a man who does not yet know he is about to be undone. He stood at the head of the room, beneath the great window where the winter dark pressed black against the glass, and he was looking at her. Adrian Vane, the Duke of Harwell, was a tall man with a stillness in him that the rest of the company did not have, as though he had been carved and the others merely assembled. His coat was the deep blue of a midnight with no moon in it. His face gave away nothing, and that was the first thing Eleanor noticed about him. That giving away of nothing, and she mistook it for coldness because she did not yet know what it cost him. She knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. She also knew, as the whole county half knew, and did not say, that before the fever, the Duke of Harwell had been understood to be courting Cecilia Whitlow. Nothing had been formal. No banns, no settlement, no word spoken to a solicitor. There had been letters, though, and there had been that supper, and there had been the way he bent his head to her laugh, and then there had been the fever, and the funeral in the rain, and the season had folded the whole matter away as one folds a letter one does not intend to answer. Eleanor looked at the floor. She had not come to be looked at. She had come to stand for an hour in her sister's silk and then to go home, and she could not understand why the greatest man in the room had fixed his attention on her and would not take it away. The truth was simpler and stranger than coldness. Adrian had seen the gown and known it at once. The pale green silk, the line of the hem, and for a moment the candlelit gallery had gone very far away, and he had been standing again at a supper in town with the only person who had ever made him laugh without trying. Then he had seen the face above the gown and understood. It was not. Cecilia would never again be Cecilia, and the grief had moved through him like a draught through a shut-house. None of it showed. That was the discipline of his whole life, that none of it ever showed. And then he crossed the room. The company noticed it, the way a field notices a change in the wind. Conversations did not stop so much as lean. The orchestra played on. Eleanor felt, rather than saw him approach, felt the room's attention swing toward her like a door opening on a cold corridor, and when she lifted her eyes, he was there, closer than propriety. Strictly liked. And he was looking at the gown and then at her face as though comparing 2 pages of the same letter. "Miss Whitlow?" he said. His voice was low and level. A voice that did not need volume because no one in his hearing had ever dared to talk over it. "You came. My aunt felt the invitation could not be refused, Your Grace." She heard her own voice come out steadier than she was. "I hope I do not give offense by it." Something passed across his face. There and gone. "No," he said. "No offense." He did not ask her to dance. He did not say the gown was her sister's, though she saw in the set of his jaw that he knew. He stood with her a moment longer than the room could explain to itself, and then he inclined his head and moved on, and the whole gallery exhaled, and began in low voices to construct the story it preferred. By morning the story had hardened. The plain Whitlow girl, they said, had worn her dead sister's gown to snare the Duke, had paraded her grief like a lure, had come to Harwell's ball, not to mourn, but to angle. Eleanor heard it in the milliner's shop and again from her aunt's own mouth, and each time the words were the same, and each time they hurt in the same place. And she said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the season would believe. She had not come to snare anyone. She had come because she could not bear to think of the gown shut forever in a press, growing yellow, smelling of cedar and absence, when it might walk once more through a lit room as Cecilia had walked. That was all. The county had decided otherwise, and the county's decisions had the force of law. Eleanor was 23, and for the whole of her life she had stood beside her sister the way a candlestick stands beside, a candle, present and unremarked. Cecilia had been the bright one, the laughing one, the one the assemblies turned to look at. Eleanor had been the one who remembered where everything was kept, who sat with their father through the long last winter of his cough, who could be trusted and therefore was never chosen. She had made a kind of peace with it. Peace, she had found, was mostly a matter of expecting nothing and being correct. Her wound was not grief alone, though grief was in it. Her wound was the slow lesson, delivered 1,000 small times, that she was the sister one settled for, and never the sister one wanted. She had buried Cecilia in the spring, and with her she had buried the last person who had ever looked at her, and seen Eleanor, rather than the space beside Cecilia. She did not expect to be seen again. She expected, as she had always expected, to endure. The Duke called at her aunt's house 4 days after the ball. It was not done. A Duke calling at the house of a family with no fortune and a dead daughter and a living one nobody wanted, and the whole street watched the carriage stand at the door. Eleanor's aunt fluttered and curtsied and offered tea the family could not really spare, and the Duke drank none of it. He sat in the small, cold parlor and looked too large for it, and he asked Eleanor, with no preamble at all, whether she would do him the honor of riding out with him the following week. Her aunt answered before Eleanor could. Of course she would. Of course, Your Grace, it would be the family's great honor. Eleanor watched the Duke's eyes and saw that he had not asked her aunt, and that he noticed, and that he did not correct it because correcting it would have made the small woman smaller. And he was not, whatever the county thought, a man who made people smaller for sport. When he rose to leave, he paused at the parlor door, where the light from the window fell across him, and he said, very quietly, so that only Eleanor heard, "She wore it well. So do you. Gat." And then he was gone, and Eleanor stood holding the cold teapot, and did not understand for some hours why her hands were not steady. The ride was on a gray afternoon with the smell of coming snow in it. He brought a quiet brown mare for her, and rode his own black gelding a little ahead. And for a long while neither of them spoke, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which surprised her, because she had expected to have to fill it. The country rolled away brown and bare on either side, the hedges black, the sky the color of a pewter dish. A farm cart had left ruts in the lane, frozen now into hard gray ridges, and the mare picked her way along them with a delicacy that made Eleanor think the animal had been chosen for a nervous rider, and she wondered, briefly, whether he had thought of that, and decided he had, and did not know what to do with the thought. The cold got into her gloves. She did not say so. She had spent her whole life not saying so. When at last he spoke, it was not about her sister. "My brother died at sea," he said, watching the road. "6 years ago. He was 2 years younger than I, and twice as well liked. And he should have had all of it. The title and the house and the whole weight of it. And he would have carried it better than I do." He paused, and the gelding's ears turned back toward him as though the horse too were listening. "I sent him." There was a quarrel, a stupid one, over a matter I could not now tell you the shape of. And I said a thing I cannot unsay, and he took a commission to be away from me, and the ship went down off Finisterre with all hands. They never found her. There is no grave. I have a letter he wrote from Plymouth, the last one, and it is cheerful. And that is the part I cannot forgive. That he died still cheerful, and still angry with me, and I let him go to sea, with both of those things unmended. His hands were quiet on the reins. So you see, I am not cold, Miss Whitlow, whatever they tell you. I am only a man who has learned that the things he loves do not survive his loving them. Eleanor said nothing for a moment. A bird went up out of the hedge, dark against the pewter sky, and the sound of its wings was very loud in the cold. She thought of her father's last winter, of the cough that had filled the house like weather, of the way she had learned that there are some things one cannot mend by sitting up all night beside them, though one sits up all the same. "My sister thought you were the kindest man she had ever met," she said. "She told me so. She said you listened as though what she said mattered, and that no one had ever done that before." His jaw moved, the smallest motion, the kind of thing a person learned to hide and could not quite. "Did she?" he said. "She did. I thought you should know it. Whatever you blame yourself for, you did not fail to be kind to her. You were the best of what her last spring held." Eleanor looked at the road ahead, because it was easier than looking at him. "I do not say it to comfort you. I have no gift for comfort, and I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. I say it because it is true, and someone ought to, and because I have noticed that the people who most need to hear such things are the ones no one dares to say them to." He turned in the saddle and looked at her. Then a long look. And what was in it she could not name, only that it was not the look the county had taught her to expect. The look that slid past her to the empty air where the prettier woman ought to have been. He looked at her as though she were a window and not a wall. It frightened her more than coldness would have. "Come back to the house," he said. "It is going to snow and you are not dressed for it. Come in by the fire before you ride home." It was a command. The way everything he said was a command, the authority of his rank sitting in the plain shape of the words. She heard the order in it. She did not yet hear, as the careful listener might, the care underneath, the man who had watched her shoulders draw up against the cold and could not let it pass. She went, because one did not refuse a duke, and because the fire was warm, and because some part of her that she did not examine wanted nothing in that hour so much as to be told by someone to come in out of the cold. Harwell House in winter was a great quiet ship of a place. All long galleries and shut rooms and a single fire seemed a small thing against it. He led her to a morning room where a child's voice could be heard, and there, on a low stool by the hearth, sat a boy of perhaps 5, with the Duke's own dark hair and a wooden horse in his fist. "My ward," the Duke said. "Thomas, my brother's son. His mother is dead also. He came to me with nothing but the horse." Something in his voice had gone careful. The careful of a man holding a thing he is afraid to drop. He does not speak much. He has not, since he came. Eleanor crouched down by the stool, her sister's green silk pooling on the floor, and she did not coo at the boy or call him a poor lamb the way the county ladies would have. She had seen what that did to a child who had lost everything, the way pity sat on him like a wet coat. She looked instead at the wooden horse. "He has a fine seat," she said gravely of the carved animal. "Better than mine. I nearly came off twice on the way here, and once I should certainly have fallen if the mare had not been more sensible than I was." The boy looked at her. He did not smile. Then he held the horse out an inch, an offering, and she took it and turned it in her hands and admired the worn places where his thumb had rubbed the paint away, the bare wood showing through at the neck, and the saddle where a small hand had held it through. How many frightened nights she did not let herself imagine. She found a chip in one carved ear and touched it. "He has been in the wars," she said. "So have you. I think we will not mention it. Soldiers do not like to be asked." And she handed the horse back with the seriousness it deserved, and the boy took it and held it to his chest and watched her with the unblinking attention of a creature deciding whether to trust. The Duke stood in the doorway and watched, and he did not know that his own face had changed. But Eleanor, glancing up, saw it change, saw the still water of him stir, and she looked quickly back at the boy, so that he would not know she had seen. That was the afternoon the thing between them began, though neither of them called it anything, and the county would have laughed to hear it called love. The plain Whitlow girl and the Duke of Harwell in a cold morning room over a child who would not speak. The visits became a habit no one approved of. Eleanor came to read to Thomas, who would sit nearer to her each week, who began at last to say a word and then two, who one gray morning laughed at a voice she made for the wooden horse, and then clapped a hand over his own mouth as though laughing were forbidden. Eleanor laughed too, to show him it was allowed. And across the room the Duke set down the letter he had not been reading, and looked at the pair of them by the fire for a long moment before he remembered to look away. There was a book of fables, with a torn spine that became theirs, and a particular chair, and a particular hour of the afternoon when the light came in low and gold, and these small fixed things gathered around the three of them like the walls of a room no one had built on purpose. He told her things he had told no one. The quarrel with his brother, word for word, the thing he could not unsay. The nights he did not sleep, when he walked the long galleries with a candle and counted the closed doors. The way the house felt like an accusation, every shut room a thing he had failed to fill. And she told him in return about the long winter of her father's cough, about being the daughter who stayed when the doctor came, and the daughter who was not asked to dance, about a life lived in the margin of a brighter page, always the footnote, and never the line. They did not touch. He never offered more than a hand at her elbow to help her from the saddle, a steadying that lasted a half-second longer than a steadying, needed to his bare fingers warm, even through her glove, and each time he drew his hand back a little too deliberately, as a man sets down something he is not sure he is permitted to hold. Yet the air between them had begun to carry a charge, and her body knew it before her mind would let her. The way she could feel exactly where he stood in a room without looking, the way her pulse moved at the sound of his step in the gallery, the way the cold went out of her when he came near, as though he carried his own weather. One afternoon, reaching for the same fallen book, their hands had come within an inch of one another on the carpet, and both had stopped, neither quite withdrawing, the inch between them holding more than the whole length of the room, until Thomas called out, and the moment closed over, like water. She had thought of that inch for 3 days. She told herself it was nothing. Her body, which did not lie to her the way her mind so willingly did, told her otherwise, and she lay awake with the truth of it and did not give it a name, because a name was a thing one could lose, and she had lost enough. The Dowager Duchess of Harwell, the Duke's aunt, watched all of it from the great chair by the fire, and did not approve, and made her disapproval known in the way of such women with kindness laid over iron. "You are good with the child," the Dowager said to Eleanor one afternoon, when the Duke had been called away. Her fan moved slowly. "It is a pity you cannot be his governess. But of course, your family would not permit a daughter to go into service. Even a daughter in your particular situation." She let the word situation hang in the cold air. "He must marry, you understand. He must marry well, and soon, and bring a mistress to this house who can carry its name. There is a young woman, Miss Carstairs, with 30,000 pounds, and a mother who knows what is owed. You will have heard of her." The fan paused. "I tell you this kindly, my dear. You are a sensible girl. I would not have you mistake a man's gratitude for something it can never become." Eleanor heard the dismissal under the kindness. The same dismissal the woman in garnet had spoken behind her fan, dressed now in better manners but meaning the same thing. The plain one. The settled for. The girl a man might be grateful to, and would never choose. She inclined her head and thanked the dowager for her frankness, and did not let her face move, and only her hand, where it rested in her lap, closed slowly into a fist and then opened again. Miss Carstairs arrived at Harwell within the fortnight. She was everything the season prized, golden and poised, and dressed in ice blue that had never been let out at the seams for anyone. She was not cruel. That was the worst of it. She was pleasant to Eleanor in the careless way the secure are pleasant to those they need not consider, asking after her health and not waiting for the answer. And she was patient with Thomas, though he shrank from her and would not give her the horse to admire, and she sat at dinner in the place that would be hers, and was by every measure the world used. Exactly correct. She spoke of the house as one speaks of a thing one expects soon to own, mentioning a wall she would have repapered, a draft she would have stopped, and the dowager nodded along as though each small claim were a stone, laid in a wall going up around Eleanor where she sat. The Duke was scrupulously courteous to her. He gave her his arm. He answered when she spoke. And Eleanor, watching from her lower place at the table, the candlelight catching the diamonds at Miss Carstairs' throat and finding nothing at her own, told herself that this was the shape of things, that she had always known the shape of things, that she had been a fool to let the warmth of a fire and a child's slow smile teach her to expect anything else. She had broken her own first rule. She had expected something, and the season, as it always did, had arrived to correct her. She went home that night in the cold carriage, and did not weep, because weeping was a thing one did when there was something to be done about the cause of it, and there was nothing to be done about being who she was. The break came at the Christmas ball, in the same long gallery where the season had first looked at her, and found her wanting the candles again, the frozen river glitter. Eleanor had not meant to come, but Thomas had asked for her, had said her name plainly and asked, and the Duke had sent the invitation in his own hand, and so she came, in the green silk again because she had no other gown fit for it, her sister carried in once more upon her living shoulders. The dowager had arranged everything. Eleanor understood that later. The dowager had placed Miss Carstairs at the Duke's side near the great window, had drawn the company's eye to the handsome correctness of the pair, and had let it be understood in the way such things are, let be understood without a word spoken aloud, that an announcement was near. And then at the height of it, with the room full and warm and watching, the dowager turned to Eleanor across the press of people and said, in a voice pitched exactly to Carrie, "Miss Whitlow, how loyal of you to wear it yet again. One does admire a girl who makes the most of what little she has. Tell me, was there truly nothing of your own to wear to honor my nephew's house?" The gallery heard it. The gallery went, for a held breath, very quiet, the orchestra sawing on into a silence that had opened beneath it, the music suddenly absurd, playing to a room that had stopped listening. Eleanor felt the heat climb her throat and knew her face had gone the color of shame, and she felt every eye in the long, bright room settle on her at once, the weight of all that attention, the thing she had spent her life arranging never to attract. She understood that this was the third time that the dismissal had followed her from the milliner's whisper, to the dowager's kind iron to this, the public stripping, the season delivering its verdict in the open at last. She was the plain one. She was the girl who made the most of what little she had. She had worn a dead woman's gown because she had nothing, and now everyone would say so to her face, and the saying of it would become the true thing, the thing the county remembered when her name was spoken, long after she herself was gone. Soxa! A fan moved somewhere. A woman tittered and was hushed. The dowager waited, serene, certain, having played the card she had been holding all season, and watched to see the girl crumble. She did not run. She wanted to. Every animal instinct in her wanted the door, and the cold, and the long, dark ride home. Yet she thought of Thomas, who had learned that laughing was allowed, and she thought that if she ran, she would teach him the opposite, and so she stood in the terrible quiet, and lifted her chin, and found her voice. "It was my sister," she said. The words came out clear and did not shake. "I wear it because she was happy in it once. In this county, in a room not unlike this one. I wear it because I would rather carry her memory through a lit room than leave it to yellow in the dark. It is the only thing of value I own, and I have never pretended otherwise." She looked at the dowager and did not look away. "If that offends the house, I am sorry for it. But I will not be ashamed of loving her." It was the sentence she could not have said 4 months before. It cost her everything to say it, and it landed in the silence and lay there. And the gallery did not know what to do with it, and the dowager's fan stopped moving. Then Eleanor curtsied, low and correct, to the room and to no one, and she turned to go, because she had said her piece and there was nothing left in the bright cold room for her, and her eyes had begun to sting, and she would not weep where they could see it. She had crossed half the gallery toward the doors when she heard him. Eleanor. Her own name. Her given name in his voice, spoken aloud in front of the whole assembled season. He had never used it before. It stopped her where she stood as no command could have, and the room turned as one body to look at the Duke of Harwell, who had risen from his place beside Miss Carstairs and was crossing the floor toward the plain Whitlow girl in 3 long strides, his face for the first time in the memory of anyone present entirely undefended. He stopped before her. The candlelight was on his face, and there was nothing carved about it now. Nothing still as ice over a river. Only a man who had decided to stop hiding in front of everyone he had ever hidden from. "The gown is the most honest thing in this room," he said, and his voice was not low now. It was pitched for the gallery to hear, and so is the woman wearing it. He turned his head to the company, to his aunt, to Miss Carstairs in her flawless ice blue, and then back to Eleanor. He took her hand. Then he spoke the words once, and only once, and the season carried them out into the night, and into the new year, and into every drawing room in the county. "I'm going to marry Eleanor Whitlow." The silence held for one heartbeat, and another. Then the room broke into sound, low and rushing, the field after the wind has passed through it. The dowager's hand had risen halfway to her throat and stopped there. Miss Carstairs, to her great credit, was the first to understand, and something in her face that had been merely correct became briefly almost relieved, as though she too had been carrying a part she had not chosen and was glad to set it down. She inclined her head to Eleanor, a small private acknowledgement, and stepped back, and was no longer at the center of anything, and did not seem to mind. Eleanor could not speak. Her hand was in his, and his hand was warm, and she could feel his pulse in it, quick, the calm of him gone, and she understood at last and all at once that the stillness had never been coldness, that it had been a held breath, that he had been waiting for someone to look at him and see a man, and not a title or a wound or a duty he had failed. "You do not have to," she managed. "I have nothing. I am the plain one. Your aunt is right, that I have nothing. You have the truth," he said, low again now for her alone, the gallery falling away. "You sat with my brother's son until he laughed. You told me I had not failed to be kind. You wore your love through a room full of people who despised you for it, and you did not put it down. I have spent 6 years believing the things I love do not survive me." His hand tightened on hers. "I would like, very much, to be wrong." The dowager left the ball early. She was not destroyed. No one destroyed her. In the weeks that followed she came, in her own time and her own way, to call on the future Duchess, and she sat in the morning room with her fan in her lap, and watched Eleanor with Thomas, and at last she said stiffly that perhaps she had been hasty, that the boy was better for the girls being in the house, that the house was warmer. She did not say she had been wrong. Women of her years and rank did not say such words aloud, for they had been raised inside an order that did not allow for them. Yet she set her fan down on the table and left it there, and asked in a voice gone unaccustomedly small whether she might come again on Thursdays to see the child, and Eleanor understood that the asking was the apology, the whole of it, all the woman had. It was as near to contrition as her rank permitted, and Eleanor, who knew the cost of the words to the one saying them, accepted it as the gift it was and never spoke of it again. The dowager came every Thursday after that, and taught Thomas a card game with a great show of severity, and was, in her cool and guarded fashion, content. They were married in the small church, in the village, in the last week of the old year, with the snow coming down soft outside the windows, and the company small, just those who mattered, which was not the season's measure of mattering, but Eleanor's. The vicar's voice was thin in the cold stone, and the candles guttered when the door let in the weather. And Eleanor stood in a plain new gown, her own at last, and found that she did not miss the green silk on this of all days because she had carried her sister long enough, and it was time now to be carried herself. Thomas stood up with them in a coat made small for the occasion, and held the wooden horse through the whole of it, and did not let go. And when the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the boy said clearly to the horse that they were married now, as though informing it of a change in the household it would need to observe. On the night before the wedding, alone in her room, Eleanor had taken her sewing scissors, and with great care opened an inch of the gown's hem where it had ridden against her ankle through every lit room of that strange winter. She drew out the forget-me-not. Pressed flat and dry, the small blue flower Cecilia had hidden there the night before. A supper in town, the night a man had bent his head to her laugh. Eleanor held it in her palm and looked at it for a long time. She did not weep. The grief had changed its shape across the winter, the way ice changes to water, and then to something the ground drinks and keeps. She thought of her sister laughing in the green silk. She thought that Cecilia, who had been generous in the way the secure are generous, would not have grudged her this, would in fact have laughed her bright laugh to see it, the plain sister chosen at last, the gown that had carried one happiness, carrying another. She pressed the flower between two leaves of her mother's prayer book, where it would not yellow in the dark, and she closed the book, and she went down to be married. If Eleanor's winter moved you, stay a moment at the end of it with me. Think of someone the world decided not to see. They are nearer than you suppose. By spring, the house at Harwell was not a quiet ship any longer. There were voices in the galleries that had been shut, and a child's running feet on the long floors, and a woman who knew where everything was kept, and was for the first time in her life, asked. The fire was lit in the morning room every day whether there was company or not, because the new Duchess liked it, and her husband had learned to like the things she liked. The draught that Miss Carstairs would have stopped went unstopped, because Eleanor found she liked the way the curtain stirred with it, and the wall that would have been repapered stayed as it was. Thomas spoke now in whole sentences, mostly to the wooden horse and to Eleanor in that order. And the order shifted by slow degrees as the months went on, until one morning he ran the length of the gallery to tell her a thing he had seen, a fox at the edge of the wood. And the running and the telling were so ordinary and so impossible that she had to sit down on the window seat and hold him a moment, before he wriggled free and was gone again, the horse forgotten on a chair. On an evening late in April, with the windows open and the last light long and gold across the floor, Eleanor sat by that fire with the prayer book in her lap and the small pressed flower between its leaves. And her husband came and stood behind her chair and put his hand on her shoulder, and she covered it with her own. Across the room, Thomas had fallen asleep against the fender with a horse in his fist, and neither of them moved to wake him, and the fire settled, and outside a thrush was singing the day down. Adrian looked at the open book in her lap, at the flat blue flower, and he did not ask. He had learned of all the things she taught him, that some things are carried and not explained. He only bent his head, the way he had once bent it to a laugh in a supper-room in town, and rested his cheek a moment against her hair. She would have liked it here, Eleanor said, my sister. She liked the warm room and a window open. Then we will keep them open, he said. The thrush sang on. The light moved across the floor and went, the way light does, and was not mourned because it would come again. Eleanor closed the prayer book over the flower and held it in her lap, and looked at the sleeping child in the open window and the man whose hand was warm under hers, and understood that she had been wrong about the one thing she had been most certain of in all her life. She was not the sister one settled for. She was the one who had been seen at last, in a room full of people who could not see her, by the only eyes that had learned how to look. The candle on the table burned steady and low, and she let it burn and did not count it.